This is Crypto PTSD, a place for those who have seen the unknown and now must face a new reality. For we know legends are real and they live just outside your door. So join us every Monday night to hear the encounters from the survivors themselves.
It could do worse than kill you. I mean, it just seemed like it could suck your soul out.
Well, initially I said, don't even look back, John, don't even look back.
I could feel the blood rush from my face, thinking these were my last moments. What am I going to do?
And now, your host and creator, Dustin.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Crypto PTSD. We've got an awesome show lined up for tonight. But before we get into that, I'd like to remind everyone that if you haven't joined the Crypto PTSD family yet, hit that subscribe button. I'll send you a notification every week when we upload our new show. And as always, if you've had an encounter and you'd like to be a guest on the show, send me an email. My email address is cryptoptsd@gmail.com, and don't forget to put encounter in the subject line. Let's go ahead and get into it tonight. Tonight, I'd like to welcome Larry onto the show. Larry, thanks for coming on, man.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Larry, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and you can be as specific or as vague as you want to be.
Well, my name is Larry. I live currently in Clinton, Oklahoma. I'm an Oklahoma native. I work here. Pretty much have grown up here. Not really much interesting. That's pretty much it.
Now, Larry, I understand that you worked in Naval Special Warfare. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, I did. I spent 8 years in the military. I was 21 when I went in, and I kind of got into a special boat unit. I was going into the Navy to be a welder. I really never welded much, but yeah, I was logistical and tactical support for 4 different SEAL teams, 3 or 4 different recon teams from Marines, and just anybody that needed us. We would take them around, drop them off, go in and help them do things. I spent almost a year in South America with a task force down there doing drug interdiction. That was probably one of the most exciting times I've had down there. We did quite a bit of stuff inland and on the water, so it was pretty interesting, to say the least.
That sounds awesome, man. That seems like every little boy's dream to do something like that.
Yeah, well, it was I didn't realize it at the time how fortunate I was. I was, like I said, I didn't have any intention of being anything but just a welder in the Navy. And now I look back on it, and I'm glad it happened the way it did. You know, I have a lot of memories to share with my family and pass down to my kids.
Yeah, that sounds like an exciting time, man. But all right, let's go ahead and get into it tonight. Larry, will you start off by letting everyone know where at in Oklahoma these encounters took place?
Yeah, that's no problem. The most of them happened as a child anyway, and we've got a lake. Well, there's several lakes in Oklahoma, but there's one in particular in Sequoia County. It's called Lake Tenkiller. I grew up probably about a mile as the crow flies from Lake Tenkiller. We lived out in a rural area. My closest neighbor was my great uncle that was half a mile to 3/4 mile away. Was surrounded by woods and cow fields and, you know, just a typical rural setting. And the sightings that I had all occurred within 5 miles of where I lived.
All right, Larry. Well, here in just a second, I'm going to hand it off to you. Just start from the beginning, take us through. I'll let you get all the way through each encounter, and then I'll stop you and we'll go back and ask you a few questions, and then we'll move on. But Larry, go ahead and take it away.
My first encounter was, I don't remember the date exactly. I think I was around 8 to 10. You know, it's pretty vague when that was so long ago. But anyway, I hunted a lot as a kid. I was the only boy in my family. I had 2 older sisters, and my friends lived so far away, so it wasn't easy for me to go visit my friends a lot. So I hunted a lot. That was one of my pastimes. I just loved it. You know, I just ate the woods up. I'd lived in the woods. There was a lot of times I'd be out in the woods past dark and get in trouble. And anytime I could get out there, I was there. Well, one of my favorite things to do back then was squirrel hunt. And I not only did it for fun, but I did it for food as well for the family. Because I grew up in a pretty poor family. So what I went out and hunted and killed, we actually ate it. You know, it wasn't a sport or anything like some people see it. You know, it was a life or death sometimes. But anyway, my favorite hunting area, I had exhausted it pretty much. There was a few squirrels left, but, you know, I figured it was time to go find a new area and let that area repopulate. So there was an area that I'd been looking at it would have been northwest of my house, off out in the woods, that I didn't go into regularly. You know, it was just one of those areas I just didn't go into. One day I went in there and started scouting it out, and I walked deep back into the woods and decided to sit down by this big oak tree and just be quiet and listen and see what was going on there as far as game. Well, I was probably sitting by this oak tree 15 minutes, maybe 20. I can't be for sure exact on the time, but somewhere in that range. And I heard something off to my left, which would have been the north of me. And I look around this oak tree and I didn't see anything. And then I heard it again. And then as I turned and looked again, something just, I don't know if it stood up and ran or if it was already standing, but it took off running on two legs. And it's probably 40 feet away from me. It was very close. So I got a real good look at the feet and the legs and the buttocks and the lower part of the back. And I was confused on what I was seeing. I'd never seen anything like that. I'd heard of Sasquatch and stuff like that. That's a pretty popular tale where I grew up. But, you know, you never put two and two together. You don't ever think about it. You know, it's like, well, what's a Sasquatch? You know, and no one could ever really fully define what one was. So I guess people didn't know. But anyway, this thing, it just tore off through the woods. And I was fascinated. It was running so fast, and I jumped up and I took off after it. And it ran for a ways, and it was just like knocking brush down and briars and everything, just plowing through them like a bulldozer. And it ran through a clearing under some power lines and went into the other edge of the woods. And I ran up to that point and pretty much figured, you know, I wasn't going to catch this thing or get another look at it, because that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to get another look at it to make sure what I was seeing. And it was gone. And I never heard it anymore or nothing. Well, in my excitement, I turned around and ran home and told my dad, you know, I ran all the way home. I was probably 3 or 4 miles from my house. And, you know, I finally got home. And I told my dad, you know, in excitement, Dad, I saw a bear. Because that's the only thing that I could think of that was that big, because this thing had huge feet. I remember those distinctly. And he looked at me and he laughed. And or he didn't really laugh. He kind of chuckled. You know, he's like, boy, there's no bear in this part of the country. And I was like, well, I saw something that looked like a bear or something. I don't know what it was. And then he asked me to describe it. So I told him it was kind of a grayish brown fur on it, or hair. I don't even know. I can't distinguish between the two from memory. But then I started telling him how big it was, you know, and I started telling him about the feet. And it was like its feet were weird looking, though. I didn't know bear had feet like that. After I explained all this to him the best I could, he kind of just looked at me and gave me this wild look and said, I don't think that was a bear, boy. And you just be careful out there when you're out there in the woods, because my dad grew up in the same area. And he knew the woods just like I did. Probably better than I did, I'm sure. But I'm sure he had encounters, too, that he never talked about. So we just kind of left it at that and never talked about it anymore. And it wasn't until, probably that fall or next summer or somewhere in there, I had actually saw the Patterson-Gimlin film. And I don't even remember what I saw it on. But I remember watching that film and seeing the Sasquatch turn and look at the camera and then turn and keep walking. And that's when everything just clicked in my mind, because that's what I saw. I was like, that's it. You know, it was like, wow. The color wasn't right, but the movement, the shape, and everything else was. So that was my first encounter that I'd ever had.
All right. If it's all right, let's go back and let me ask you a few questions on that.
Yeah, sure.
So you said it had grayish brown hair. I kind of want to go back a little bit further, and I don't even know if you'll be able to give me an answer, but you said that you heard something. Do you remember what it was that you heard?
It sounded like, from what I can remember, you know, in that part of the woods, that part of the country, it's like the Ozarks. It's, you know, you've got oak trees and maple and elm trees. You got all kinds of trees in there, and the ground cover is very thick, especially in the summer. It's very dry, and any movement, you're going to hear it on the leaves. They're just crunching. And I believe I had heard some rustling, not necessarily rustling, but like something was slowly stepping on some leaves, putting their weight down on the ground is what it was, and crunching. And I think some small twigs broke. And that's the first thing that caught my attention.
Okay, and when you saw it, what was the first thing that grabbed your eye?
Like I said, the first thing that grabbed my eye was the bottom of the feet themselves. I still vividly remember those feet to this day. They weren't normal. The bottom of the feet, they looked like human feet. There was no hair or anything on them, which there wouldn't be if I walked on them, of course. But it was like the tops of them, though, had like hair. And you could see the hair kind of hanging down over the edges of the feet.
How big do you think this creature was? If you had to put a weight on this creature, how much do you think it weighed?
You know, I've thought about that over the years. And the best that I can come up with, I would have to say it probably weighed anywhere from, and this is being pretty broad, anywhere from 600 to 900 pounds. Because it was massive. It was much bigger than anything I'd ever seen.
About how far away was it when you first saw it?
When I first saw it, it was probably 40 feet away, kind of to my northwest. And it had stepped out behind, or I don't know if it stepped out, but it had moved out behind this other big oak tree that was up a ways from me.
What do you think it was doing that day? You think it was sneaking up on you?
You know, I've thought of that. It could have been. It could have been sneaking up on me. It could have been curious. I know from experience with these things now, we've discovered these things are very curious. So it could have been a younger one coming to check me out. It could have been a female coming to check me out since I was a kid. So I never felt any ill intent or anything, but, you know, I certainly have thought about that as well over the years. But I think it was, my first impression, it was just curious.
Okay, and I know you said the Patterson-Gimlin film is what kind of brought this back to your memory and being able to put it to something, but have you seen any pictures other than the Patterson-Gimlin film of a alleged Bigfoot, whether it's real or not, that you looked at it and you were like, that's what I saw, that's the exact thing that I saw?
I wouldn't say the exact thing, but yes, I have seen pictures, drawings, renditions, artist renditions, things like that, and actual photos of the color that I saw. And I can't, as far as the backside of other Sasquatches, I can't really definitively say that I've seen something that matched exactly. But as far as the hair color, yes, I have seen other pictures and whatnot that match that same color that I saw.
Okay. One thing I've picked up from listening to eyewitnesses is there seems to be different types. You have the tall, lanky ones, then you have just the tall and then wide ones, and then you also have this other kind that's kind of shorter and they're still wide, but they're like short and stumpy almost. I mean, not short, but probably 7 to 8 feet. If you had to pick one of the types, what would you match what you saw that day to?
I've been asked that as well. I remember the muscle tone in the legs and the buttocks and the lower back. I wouldn't say he was, or it, I don't know if it's male or female, I wouldn't say it was very broad, but it certainly wasn't skinny. Certainly wasn't small. And its definition of its muscle tone, it was compared to a weightlifter, a professional weightlifter. It was very defined. And the buttocks and everything, I couldn't see any fat on this thing. I mean, you could see the muscles very, very clearly, and they were pretty big. So he was pretty buff, or it was pretty buff, whatever it was. So I don't know, probably the type 1, maybe type 2. I don't know if it had a conical head or not. I never saw its head, so I can't say that for sure. But
whenever it ran, a lot of people say that they run very smooth. They don't bob up and down. Do you remember seeing any of those details?
Yes. That's the other thing that struck me. To me, it almost mimicked like what a linebacker or something would do on a football team. It kind of tucked its shoulders down a little bit and took off, but it was a smooth run. It wasn't like a clumsy run, and it wasn't very loud. It wasn't like it was stomping. It was running very gracefully. And every now and then it looked like I could see it just kind of move its arms and, move limbs and stuff out of its way. But other than that, I didn't see much else. But the grace of it running was, it was almost mesmerizing the way it just ran. So,
yeah. All right. So after seeing that, getting home and running in the door, telling your family what you just saw, did you get the reaction you were expecting?
No, no, I didn't. No, absolutely not. My dad, he was not as excited as I was, obviously. He wasn't worked up at all. He was doing something, and he just kind of looked over at me and said what he said and went right back to what he was doing. I was so excited. I wanted them to be excited with me. But, yeah, that's not what happened.
All right, before we get into your next encounter, are there any other encounters that happened to you as a kid that you would like to tell us?
I wouldn't say encounters. I never came up on anything, but I discovered things that didn't match any known creature in that area. Because, like I said, I lived in those woods. I knew the animal. We heard a scream one night. We had coon hunting dogs because we used to coon hunt a lot. And we kept them chained up or in their pens, just depending on the time of the year, I mean. But we had a spring down below our house. It was off on a little bluff down below our house. And the spring turned in, it fed a creek. And it was nice, cold, clean water. And this was in the middle of summertime. And I was outside. I think my dad and my sisters may have been outside. I don't remember exactly. But it was dark. The sun was down. We heard a scream off down on that creek, which if that creek was probably 500 yards from my house. And if I could describe it, it was the scream of a woman being torn to pieces. I mean, it was horrifying. And I don't even know if that fully describes it. But whatever that thing was, our dogs ran into their dog houses and did not come back out the rest of the night. I had never seen my coon dogs do that. And these were seasoned dogs. I mean, I've seen them go under rocks and stuff after 2 coons by themselves. I mean, these dogs were hardcore. But whatever that was, it scared the daylights out of them. And it scared us, too. I remember the hair standing up on my arms. And my dad kind of looked at me, and he's like, well, let's get on in the house. Yeah, so he was outside, yeah, because I remember him saying that. But, yeah, we went in the house after that, and I was asking my dad, I was like, Dad, what was that? What is that? And he goes, well, that's probably them panthers that make their way through here. And I'd never seen a panther. I had no idea what a panther was. I don't think I'd ever seen around that country was a bobcat and the glimpse of a mountain lion every now and then. But the second thing that I noticed in that area that was very odd was there was a cow pond that was about a mile off from my house that my great uncle had that that's where he grazed his cows. Well, there was a big old cottonwood tree growing beside this pond, and beavers used to get in this pond and dam up a creek that was coming through the pond. So you got a picture of this. There's a creek running, and right in the middle of this field where this creek is running, there's a pond. Well, the pond fills up, and then the creek runs on the other side and continues on. So that's what it was. It was a creek-fed pond. Well, on the edge of this pond was a huge cotton tree that was, oh Lord, it was probably 4 foot thick. I mean, it was big. Well, I was down there looking to see if there was any beaver in this pond one day, and I kind of leaned up against this cottonwood tree, and I was sitting there just kind of watching, like kids do, and just doing what they do. And I looked over at the bark on this tree, and it was scratched. And I got to look, and I backed up a little bit, and I backed up a little more, and I backed up a little bit more, and I could see it looked like 4 scratches. Well, I would say 4 fingers. Total of 8. It was like a man or something just stuck its fingers up on both hands up on the side of this tree and just scratched from about 12 foot down all the way down the trunk of the tree to almost down to the ground. And these scratches were probably an inch or 2 apart. So whatever it was, it stretched its fingers out and it dug deep. I mean, it cut into the wood of the tree. And I had never seen anything like that, and that just freaked me out. I was like, what in the world? And later on, my dad had told me that he had saw that same thing on other trees, and he was blaming it on a mountain lion or something. And so that's what I grew up just thinking, what, that did that. I'm like, God, that's a big old mountain lion. I don't want to run into that thing, But that's probably the strangest thing that I'd ever encountered out there in that part of the woods as a small kid hunting on that particular piece of property. So,
as you know, we met in Honabe at John's house, and as we're sitting there talking, there were 2 things that you said that it's funny because I've never heard anyone else say, and one of them is, in the area I grew up in, my grandfather said the same thing. Everything was blamed on the Black Panthers. Black Panthers would come behind his house as a kid down below the barn and would scream like a woman. And he talked about it, but no one ever saw them. They were just blamed on as, that's just a Black Panther. So I thought that was funny. And the other thing, and I might cut this out because people don't like hearing me talk, but boogers. When I was a kid, the only time I heard that term, what I pictured in my mind was this big, green, gooey booger, stacking cow patties on a field, and you had told me the same thing. Do you mind sharing that with everyone, the first time you heard it, and kind of what you thought the first time you heard the term booger?
Yeah, sure. It's kind of comical. Yeah, when I was a kid, like I said, I used to get in trouble for staying out in the woods after dark. And my mom and dad, they get on to me and spank me and everything. Well, they just couldn't get me in the house a lot of times. But I came in one night, and I was like, Dad, why do I got to come in? He's like, boy, you stay out there after dark, them boogers to get you. Booger men or boogers, it was something like that. But I just remember I automatically had this vision in my mind of this huge booger with arms and legs, coming running after me.
Yeah, so did I, man. That's funny. All right. So we're talking, and of course I can't help but ask everyone, have you had encounters? Has anyone had encounters with this? Because I love hearing that stuff. And I had asked you something, and it honestly, it blew me back when I heard it. You had an encounter with something out there where you grew up with that is very rare. And to be honest, most of the encounters I hear of about this, I don't believe the people are telling the truth. However, with you, I do believe that you're telling the truth. So if it's all right, just go ahead and start from the beginning, what you were doing that day, and take us through that encounter.
I'd spent the night at a friend of mine's house, a family friend. Grew up with him. He was about 3 years older than me. His name was Charlie. There were some people that had moved into this house, about a mile from Charlie's house. And again, he grew up out in the middle of the woods. So that was pretty much all of us lived in the middle of the woods. And we were wanting to go over there, and we'd met this kid at school and everything, became friends with him, and his name was Jason. And so we wanted to go to his house and just kind of hang out with him. Now, I'll say this now, and I don't mean to be controversial or anything by saying this. I just want to set the stage for the times. This will have an effect on the story later. He had two mothers. That's common now, but back then it wasn't. So everybody thought that was strange and everything, and we were curious. It's like, oh wow, you got two moms, that's cool. But anyway, we went to Jason's house, and we had dinner and everything, played, and just had a good old time. And one of the things that we did as kids was we had these floodlights, on these electrical poles out in the yard. It was, you usually only had one in the yard, and it lit the whole yard up. Well, bugs and everything would be flying around that in the summertime. Well, we would wait until that light got bright, when the sun was completely down, and we would take a white sock and put rocks in it and throw it up in the air by that light, and bats would dive at it and stuff. And for some reason, that was entertaining. I don't know why now, but then it was. Well, that's why we were doing out there that evening. And if I had to guess on a time, it was from 9 to 10, maybe 10:30 that night, because it had been dark for a while. And his parents were a lot more lenient than ours, so as long as they could see us, we were good. They were going to let us stay out there, and I do believe it was a weekend, so we could stay out there for quite a while. But we were out there just having fun, just doing what kids do. And all of a sudden, we heard something in the distance that just did not sound right. It was nothing we'd ever heard. And such a geographical location, so the audience can kind of picture, his house was down in like a valley, almost right in the middle of the valley. And there was a hill. If you're looking at it from the north, there was a hill on his right and a hill on the left of the house. And the trees had been cleared over most of this hill, so there was a fence running along the edge of the wood line. And everything else had been cleared back up to us. So we could see out there in this field, during the day, you could see everything. But the light was bright enough to where the outer edges of it kind of faded around that fence and that tree line. So you could still see that section of the woods, but it wasn't very defined. But we're standing there, and we heard something in the distance. I don't know how far it was, but it was almost like it grew soft and then increased in volume. And it was a scream. But it wasn't a scream like any scream I'd ever heard, not even the alleged panther scream that I'd heard the summer before. This scream was, oh golly, it's hard to describe the scream. I don't know I don't know if people can picture a demonic scream. I imagine everyone has a different picture in their mind of that, but it had resonance to it. You could feel the scream in your chest, but yet it had a high frequency to it that pierced your ears as well. And it just kind of captivated you. You kind of froze in place. And this scream started, like I said, out soft, and then all of a sudden it just jumped in volume. And we looked over to that wood line, and we see this red thing with glowing red eyes running along the fence line. It wasn't coming at us. It was running behind the house. As it approached the lights and got closer, we could make out more detail of it. And at first, we thought it was a goat. It was about the size of a goat, but maybe a little bit bigger. I'd say about the size of a yearling calf, a steer, if people know what size those are. But as we're looking up this animal, trying to figure out what it was, and it's screaming the whole time. I mean, it started down there and did not stop until it went out of sight. So we were froze. We could not move. And as we started looking up where the head should have been, it was like a human torso and like human arms. And the head was like human, but it had horns. And we sat there, and like I said, it came down the hill, screamed, shrieking, I guess would be another way to say it, went up the other side, out of sight. Once it went behind the house, we lost it and never saw it again. And once it got out of sight, it was like we were free to run. And this whole encounter maybe happened 15, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. But it was like we could not move. We were so scared. I'd never been that scared. And I don't think I've ever been that scared. We couldn't move. We ran in the house, locked the door. His parents were coming to the door as we were running in. And they were asking, what is that? What is that? What is that? Because they weren't from that area. I think they were actually from a bigger city up north of us. And they didn't have much experience out in the outdoors. So they were asking us, local boys, it's like, well, what kind of animal is that? We're like, well, we've never seen anything like that, and they just kept quizzing us about it because you could tell that they were in fear as well. Because whatever this thing was, everyone that heard the noise, it just sent chills down you. And the thing that sticks with me the most is the eyes. They weren't a bright red, kind of a dull red, but they were glowing. And there was not enough light given off from that floodlight to make any kind of eyes glow. So that's puzzled me my whole life, I would say. So, but yeah, that was in a nutshell. That's the weirdest thing I've ever had happen to me.
All right, Larry, I've got a whole bunch of questions here. So let's start at the beginning. You said you were throwing up sock with stuff in it, and the bats would dive at it. So was it completely dark at this point, or failing light? What was it?
No, it was completely dark. Yeah, the sun had been down for probably over an hour. So yeah, there was no light in the sky, and yeah, that was another thing I remember. It was dark. When the moon is out, you've got some kind of lunar light, but we had none that night. I remember distinctly it was very, very dark.
Okay. About how far away was the creature from the light you were under?
Let me dig in my memory bank for this one. 50 yards, perhaps. I know it wasn't any more than 100. It was because I remember the light illuminated the fence that was next to the tree line there that this thing ran by, and the light didn't go out that far, so it had to have been within 50 yards or under, up to maybe 30 yards. So it was fairly close.
Okay. So the scream was the first thing you heard. You guys heard the screaming, yes, and you all turned and looked. All right.
Mm-hmm.
The eyes, how far apart were the eyes? Were they big eyes? Did they look like they were on the front of the head or on the side?
They looked like they were on the front, but they were big. I remember them. They were big. If I could guess, from memory, they were probably the size of a $50 to a silver dollar.
Okay.
From my memory. Now I was a little kid back then, so I may be exaggerating on that. But to me, that sticks in my mind was these eyes, and they were huge.
Okay. This thing's running, and we talked about this the night you told me the story, but I want to go over it again. The way you described it running, you said it had human arms. So as if a gorilla takes off charging someone, it kind of scoops its arms out and in and as it runs, versus a goat would kind of run like a horse. It lifts its knees in front of it to run. Can you explain how this thing was running?
It was running more like a goat, and its arms were, because since that night we talked about that, I hadn't thought about that in a long time, and I've been probing through my memory on that. And best I can remember is it ran like a goat would normally run, but its arms weren't pumping like, if it was a human being. If we were running, our arms are usually pumping, moving back and forth, but I don't ever remember seeing that on this creature. Yeah, but it was definitely running like a goat would run.
Did you see hair on it? And if so, what color and how long?
If it was hair, it was red, because we remember the whole creature looked red. And that was the other thing. My friend Charlie looked more at the creature, he said, than he did the eyes, because the eyes freaked him out. He didn't want to look at him. He said And that seemed to be what I transfixed on for a little bit anyways. But I got a better look at the eyes than he did. But the way he described it to me, and from what I saw, it validates what I saw. It was, if it was hair, it was short and it was red, and it wasn't like a red, like a quarter horse. They call them kind of red sometimes, but they're not red. Well, this was not like that. This was a dark red. I mean, if you took a crayon of a dark red color and colored it, that's the kind of red it was. It wasn't a natural animal red.
All right, you said that this thing was as tall as a goat or more like a young calf. Was it as wide as a goat?
We got a good side profile of it. We didn't, it wasn't really in the light enough to see it when we could have got a frontal view of it. So I can't with any certainty say how wide it was, but side profile, I would, if I had to guess, which is what I'm kind of doing here, it was about the size of a goat. It wasn't big like a cow.
Okay.
So I guess it was kind of tall and slender. It wasn't real muscular or anything. So,
did it change pace as it ran, or did it keep the same pace the entire time from when you saw it to where it was gone?
From the time we saw it to the time we lost sight of it, it did not slow down. It kept the same pace, and it was kind of at a trot, maybe a fast trot.
Okay. If I were to run and scream as I'm running, whenever I go to let out the scream, you're going to see me probably pull my arms in because I'm pushing the air out. Did you ever see it, forcefully move its body like it was supporting the scream? What did it appear to look like to you?
No, it never moved its body. It appeared to us, it screamed. It was one long scream is what I remember. It was like it came down off that hill and started screaming and kept that same scream the whole time that it ran. And it made no movement of like it was drawing breath or anything like that, like the scream was affecting it in any way.
Wow.
So I remember that distinctly. It was one long scream.
Okay. And this one I want to save for last because I thought it was really interesting. Can you tell everyone, to the best of your memory, what the horns looked like on this thing?
They were pointed down at an angle. They weren't sticking up like a goat's horns or anything. They were pointed kind of down, like it was like at a 45-degree angle on the side of its head. And seems that they were kind of curved in, kind of point to point, but not touching each other. And if I had to say a length on the horns, I can't, maybe 8 inches. They weren't huge horns, but because I remember seeing that as in its eyes, watching its eyes, I would see something, I wouldn't say white, but it wasn't red. It was a lighter color than red. And I kept thinking in my mind, what is that? What is that? And once I got my eyes off the eyes, I looked right over and I was like, oh, those are horns. Wow. These are things I was thinking other than, along with get the heck out of here. But
yeah. All right. Let's do a little bit of speculating here. Do you think it was chasing something or being chased by something?
No, I don't think it was doing either, actually. I think it was, I think it was sent by something or someone. It came, I believe, and we believed that it came there to send a message, to scare somebody, something.
What do you think it was?
Well, part of Oklahoma I grew up in is heavily populated by Cherokee, and I'm part Cherokee myself. I had talked to several that I knew over a few years after that encounter. Because he had 2 mothers, that wasn't common back then, and it was offensive to a lot of people back then. What we speculated was, the best sense we could make out of it was that someone was offended by them, or someone was trying to send them a message, trying to make them move or something, and someone got a hold of a shaman, because there were shamans, medicine men in that area. It could have been what they call a skinwalker, Cherokee call shapeshifter, same thing. It could have been that. but we don't know. And that we kind of told ourselves that's what it was, but we don't, other than the way we grew up, we don't have any reason to believe that it was.
That's very interesting. It seems like Oklahoma is just kind of a hotbed for all this activity. Dogman, Bigfoot, skinwalkers.
Sure. Well, yeah, you've seen how vast it is. It's there's country that who knows if any people's even been on it. I mean, Oklahoma's not like most people think. Half of the state is flat, but the other half is far from it. It's all mountains and woods.
All right.
Yeah.
So outside of your encounters growing up in that area, are there any other encounters that stick out that you were told by friends or maybe were local legends that you would like to share with us tonight?
Well, there is one local legend of a octopus living in Lake Tenkiller. I can't remember the name of it, but before I was born, back in the early 70s, this was probably from 68 to 72. Now, this made the news, so this is actually verifiable if people wanted to research this. There was 2 girls swimming in a swimming area on Lake Tenkiller, and they had went out past the swimming buoys, and they were on air mattresses. And all of a sudden, they heard one of them scream. From my memory, from my dad telling me this story, they heard one of them scream, and everyone turned and looked, and they just disappeared. Something dragged them under the water, and they never came back up for air. They were just gone. And that, like I said, that actually made the news, so that's verifiable. And there's allegedly a giant octopus living in Lake Tenkiller. Now, I've swam a lot in that lake, so I can't say there is or there isn't, but that's a local legend, a lore, I guess, around there.
Wow.
And there's my grandfather, like I said, I'm Indian descent. My great-great-grandmother was full-blood Cherokee. My grandfather, he was almost full-blood. And my dad, he was quite a bit himself. I don't know, and I kind of lose track of how much they were. But my great-grandmother was a medicine woman. And she taught my dad a lot of stuff, and my grandpa a lot of stuff. There's a lot of family lore that went along with that. I mean, there's stories of shapeshifters. A guy, one in particular, there's a guy, my grandfather told me this story. He used to tell this story quite often. There was a guy, I guess he wasn't very nice to his wife. He was kind of mean to her and everything, but he would always go out to the local clubs. Back then they had barn dances, I think is what they had. My grandpa said they square dances, stuff like that. But he would go off to these on the weekends and leave his wife at home. And they lived out in a rural area, of course. And she got to messing around with this local, I guess he was a medicine man. And he almost got caught in their house one night. And she told this story to my grandfather later on. That's how we know all the details that we do. He ran out the back door as the husband was coming home. Well, it was either a few hours later that night or the next night. I don't remember exactly, but there was a hoot owl sitting on the horse corral fence that was just right in front of the house, and it kept hooting and making, just obnoxious noises and stuff. So this guy, he just grabbed a shotgun, opens the front door, and shoots the thing. And it flops around in the barnyard, and he's like, all right, I got it. He put his gun back up, went to bed. Well, he went out there the next morning to throw it off, out in the woods or something, and it was gone. There was a few feathers laying on the ground, but the owl was gone. Well, he didn't think anything of it. A coon or a possum or something got it. Well, that evening, the guy she was having an affair with that was a medicine man was found dead from shotgun wounds in his house. And Grandpa and everybody said he was a shapeshifter. And he was the owl that was sitting on the fence. So that's one story that sticks in my mind that I'll never forget my grandpa told me.
When your grandfather told you this, was it just story time, or do you think that your grandfather absolutely believed this?
No, he was dead serious. I mean, there was no laughter or nothing. He was completely serious. So like that's why I always believed him.
Yeah. Did you ever grow up with someone that saw Bigfoot or, heard of them being around?
Yeah, my friend Charlie, actually, he said he had ran into him when he was out. He'd be out hunting in his part of the woods. And he said he ran into one time. He was, let me think, what did he say he was doing? I remember the Bigfoot. He said he almost ran into one. It stepped out from behind a tree as he was walking or something. And I don't remember the exact details of what he told me, how he encountered it, but I remember the encounter. He said he stopped, looked up at this thing, and it just kind of stared at him. And he said he could have reached out and touched it. It was that close. And he said he just stood there, didn't say a word, and it just kind of stepped around him and kept on going. That was the closest encounter that I know of that anyone had had.
All right, Larry, I know you had an encounter while you were out with a friend working one day. Would you share that encounter with us?
Sure. This was 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 to 5 years ago. I don't remember exactly, but what do they call it? The Chupacabra. The thing you pull up on the internet. You type in Chupacabra on Google, and this dog-looking, coyote-looking thing comes up. This hairless dog. This brown, blackish, ugly dog comes up. Well, I was working in the oil field. That's my occupation, and I drive a truck in the oil field. A friend of mine was ahead of me in his truck, and he was probably a mile ahead of me. And I see him stop on this rural road we're on. And I'm like, I guess he's having problems, so I'll ease up here and see what's going on. So I pull up there, and as I'm slowing my truck down behind his to stop it, he jumps out of his truck, and he's pointing across the street, across the road in this field. And I'm like, what are you pointing at? What's going on? I was confused in a minute. So I set my brakes and I jumped out of my truck and I was like, you okay? What's wrong? He goes, what is that? And I turned around and looked, and then I saw it. It was that typical whatever Chupacabra. And it was just kind of trotting. It was a fast walk out in this field. It had its tongue hanging out and just kind of walking through this field. Well, there was a gate there that was open. So we walked out for probably 100 to 200 yards following it. And it turned around and look at us, stop for a second, look at us, and just keep going. It wasn't threatened by us at all. And we just kept saying, man, this thing's ugly. Look at this. And if you Google that, and you'll get a picture of what we saw. That was exactly what we saw. And it ran off into a grove of trees, and we just kind of stood there, kind of not really shocked, but just really dumbfounded by what we saw. And after a few minutes, we went back and finished our job. But yeah, that's the most recent strange thing besides Sasquatch that I've seen.
Now, there's a lot of speculation and arguing over the Chupacabra. A lot of people think it's just a coyote with mange or coy dog or whatever. Do you think that's what it could have been? It could have been a coyote with mange, or are there physical traits to it that led you to believe otherwise?
Yeah, there were physical traits to it. I mean, this was not a coyote with mange. I grew up raising dogs. I know what mange looks like. Its skin, it didn't have any hair. Its skin was healthy. You could just look at it. I mean, I got that close of a look at it. It was no more than 30 feet from me at one point. Its ears were longer than a typical dog's ears. Its legs were different. They were real bony and skinny. Its tail, its muzzle was kind of smushed up a little bit and wrinkled, but not a lot, but a little bit. And it had no hair at all on it. I didn't see any hair on it. And I believe the back legs were a little bit longer than the front, or vice versa. I can't remember exactly, but it was something about its legs were not normal from any kind of coyote, dogs, or pictures of wolves or anything that I've seen. So it definitely did not have mange.
How big was this creature? How much do you think it weighed?
Oh, probably 60 pounds at the most, 50 to 60. It wasn't very big. It probably stood 2 foot off the ground. Yeah, maybe 2 foot. You know, it was small.
Did it look
But
emaciated, or did it look healthy?
No, it looked healthy. That's what I was going to say. It didn't look bony. It looked healthy. I mean, of course, you could see its rib cage where it came to an end because there's nothing there but skin. But that's it. You didn't see. It didn't look scrawny at all. It looked like it had been eaten pretty healthy.
Where was this at? What part of Oklahoma were you in?
I was in close to central Oklahoma, and there's a little town called Geary, Oklahoma. And if you go down I-40 from Oklahoma City west for about 40 miles, you'll come to exit 108 on I-40. If you go north about 15 miles, you will come into this little town called Geary. Well, we were about 7 to 8 miles northeast of this little town, out in the middle of just wheat fields and cow pastures.
Wow, that's, especially when you're just doing your daily job and you see something like that. I get it when you say you were just dumbfounded, like, did we really just see this?
Yeah, because he kept asking me, what is that? What is it? And I was like, I don't know, man. I don't know. Matter of fact, it was a Friday, I remember, because that evening me and my wife went to his house. We just had a little cookout at his house, and we were telling our wives and trying to describe it to him. And I got to Googling, strange dogs and stuff like that. And then that's when I came across that picture, and I was like, Ryan, look. And I showed him my phone. He goes, that's it. What is that? And it was we talked about it all day long. We couldn't quit talking about it. It was just, wow, so strange.
Wow. All right, Larry, we got to meet this year down for the Honabe conference there in Oklahoma, and we all kind of a mutual friend, John, who owns a property right there by the campground where the festival is and close to the house where the actual, siege of Honabe happened. While we met down there, John had been having some activity on the property, so of course, we're all excited to have something happen. Well, my luck, you remember that I came by and you were the only one awake. Everyone else was sleeping in the tents, and I was like, well, we'll come back later. Well, we ended up falling asleep in the hotel and not coming back out the last night. And of course, that's when everything happens. Do you mind telling us what happened from your perspective that night?
We were all sitting around the campfire that night. It was like, there again, the sun was completely down. I don't know exactly what time it was, but we'd been sitting there for quite a while, just telling stories and just talking and just doing what we do, just having a good time with friends. Well, Chuck had set out some recorders over by his tent, which was no further than 40 yards at the most. I don't even think it was 40 yards, maybe even been 15 to 20 yards from the campfire. He had set out some recorders out there, and I don't know exactly where he set them, but anyway, he got up from the circle and he was going over there to check his recorders. He told me that while he was over there, he thought he'd just go ahead and make a whoop call or a female call. I don't remember exactly what he said, but anyway, he made the call and we all heard it. Well, about 30 seconds later, this almost like a roar came back, and there again, it was vibrating. I mean, it was loud. And we were all just sitting there talking about different encounters and stuff. And Barry, another good friend of ours, me and him were sitting next to each other, and we talked about this later. And we both thought at the same time, it was like, wow, that was pretty impressive. You go, guy. And he come running back over there right after that. And he goes, did you hear that? Did you hear that? And we're like, yeah, that was pretty good. And he was like, no, did you hear that? And we're like, yeah, that was you. And he goes, no, that was not me. And then John was like, yeah, that was you. And Chuck was like, no, guys, I'm serious. That was not me. So then we took notes. Like, oh, what do we got going on here? Well, when we stood up, started gathering lights and cameras and all this stuff, because, thermals and everything, there was a herd of deer off in the distance. There was a church. What would you say that church was? 250 yards from John's house?
Yeah, probably right around there. I'm not, the church is at the top of the hill over there, but there's that light that's closer. So I'd say between 2 and 3.
Yeah. Yeah, well, under this light, there was probably 10 to 12 deer just took off running under there. And then we're like, uh-oh, something's going on here. I had made a high-powered spotlight, and I plugged it in and lit the whole area up. And we're sitting there, and immediately we got eye shine. And we kept looking, and this thing, it kept ducking down behind a fallen tree. Chuck had hung a recorder on that tree the first day we got there, and that was reflecting. So some people were seeing that, and they were saying, "Oh, look, that's it." And we're like, "No, that's a recorder. That's not it," because we were seeing kind of a yellow eye shine. Oh, we stood there looking at it, trying to find it, pinpoint it for a few minutes. Barry went and got his thermal, and he walked outside of the gate on the side of the road there in the driveway, and he's scanning. He goes, I got it here. It's behind that tree. And he was telling us where it was. Well, we were standing there, and we couldn't see it. Nothing was moving. So I was like, I'm going out there with Barry. That's what I thought in my mind. So I put the light down because everyone had their thermals and night vision and everything out at that time. So I went out there with Barry. I'm looking, and I'm like, yeah, there it is. It's behind that tree. Yeah, you could see it leaning or ducking down behind the tree. Perfect silhouette of a creature. And I was like, well, I'm going to ease out there and see if I can get it to come up. Well, Barry took off down the road as I went off out into the woods or out there across the street. Well, when we got, probably 40, 50 feet from where we started, this thing jumps up and takes off running back toward the wood thicket. Well, all of a sudden we look back, and John's wife is just jumping and screaming, pointing, going, there it is. She was so excited. That was her first sighting. She got a very good look at it, and we just got glimpses of it. We never saw it near as good as she did. That's what happened that night. And later on that night, for most of the night, I laid there awake. I just couldn't sleep, and I would hear whoops. I would hear rocks being thrown. I would, John's dog would take off running and barking, and in the area we'd seen this thing. So they stayed around most of the night. I'm pretty confident they did. So that was pretty intense there for a little bit.
Yeah, and of course, I brought my cousin with me because we had activity at the campsite that they stayed at last year, and I was there, and I heard it. But my cousin, he wanted to come. He's like, man, I just want to hear something or see something. And so, of course, the night that we don't come to John's, it all happens, which sucks. But that was her first sighting. And I'm hoping to get her to come on with John. I don't know if she's ready for that yet, but I am hoping she will be. That way she can tell us what she saw, because I kind of feel sorry for her at times, because, we all show up there, and it's like just Bigfoot stuff constantly. And yeah. I'm sure that gets old for her. But now she can actually kind of see where we're coming from, because she got to see one.
She was pumped that rest of that night, too. Oh, yeah. She was pretty excited. So, yeah, we were all happy for her. We're like, welcome to the club. And it was a good time.
Well, Larry, we could sit here and swap stories all night. I know I've enjoyed listening to you. Meeting you at the campsite that night, I heard this and I was like, I've got to get him to come on the show. Yeah, I think I even said when you agreed to come on the show, I was like, yes, this trip's been worth it. Like, I got someone to come on the show. So, man, it really means a lot, and thank you for coming on the show tonight.
No, you're welcome, man, anytime. And I hope we can run in and do some more adventures in the future together.
Absolutely. I'll be back there next year, so hopefully we'll get to meet up again.
Oh, I'm sure we will, yeah. It's been a great time, man.
Absolutely. All right, everyone, that's going to be it for tonight's show. But before we go, I'd like to remind you that if you haven't joined the Crypto PTSD family yet, hit that subscribe button. I'll send you a notification every week when we upload our new show. And as always, if you've had an encounter and you'd like to be a guest on the show, send me an email. My email address is cryptoptsd@gmail.com. And make sure you put encounter in the subject line. If you're listening to us on iTunes, take that extra minute to rate and review. It really helps out the show. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in tonight, and we'll see you next week.